Hello everyone, welcome to our Truth Be Told YouTube channel, with your host Rick Howard and Mike Maney.
Hello everyone, welcome out to Truth Be Told. As we remind you every once in a while, Truth Be Told is a goal, not
Yes.
not a declaration of absolutism.
Yes, exactly.
We are seeking to tell the truth. We tell the truth as we see it at the moment, but even at our advanced ages, and
Easy.
Mike is more advanced than I am,
Easy.
we are still willing to change as the Lord teaches us things we hadn't seen before. So truth be told is a goal.
Yes.
Hopefully we'll have till we breathe our last, huh?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And this is session 94, so we've been trying to tell the truth for at least 94 sessions.
And people may say, well, I hope you get there one day.
Yes.
So yeah, session 94, and today is April the 24th, 2024. So it's that time of year where sometimes the climate, the temperature in Missoula is close to the same as where I live in Central California. So I think both of us are supposed to be around early 70s today.
Yes. Yeah.
And so that's not too often, usually a little bit in the spring, a little bit in the fall. And then we part ways by quite a bit in the summer and winter.
Yes. Yes.
Especially winter. But good to be on with all of you. We took a detour last week, didn't we? We talked about the
red heifer.
Numbers 19. Yeah, the red heifer. Do you have any more on that? Since you ever thought any more about that? Anything more to add?
I did. I was actually doing a little more research into it, and so I thought about even maybe bringing it as a message or a lesson. So
okay.
So what intriguing.
What other? Because there's a lot out there.
There's a lot out there, and so just some of the I guess the details, the water. I thought, with the sacrifice, there was water, had to be mixed with water. Excuse me. And I got to thinking, well, how does Jesus, the whole personage of Jesus, as a type or antitype, reflect this red heifer? And where's the water come in? And I thought, well, when they put that spear to his side, water came forth. Water and blood. So I don't know if that's any correlation or not, but it's just kind of intriguing to see when you start looking at the similarities. How does he represent that red heifer? Another thing that I thought about was, he was covered in blood from head to toe. So
yes.
he had the appearance of red.
Yeah, you're right. The idea of totality. So that red heifer was completely burned.
Yeah.
And, completely bathed in blood.
Yes.
And burned. And then the ashes mixed with water. So all of that speaks about totality.
Yeah.
Of blood and water.
Even when he comes back, his robe is going to be dyed or dipped in blood. So even when he comes back, there's this a tie back to the reddish or the blood. So I know I just I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. Well, it will be interesting to see how it all plays out. We gave some possible scenarios last time about how all that may be worked out for Israel to be able to go through that red heifer offering for the purpose of purifying a Temple Mount area for them to resume their practices and to purify a priesthood to administer it.
Yes.
And whether that will actually be part of the fulfillment of prophecy or a fulfillment of the deceit of Antichrist, but maybe some of both. Because there's so much about it on the internet, all kinds of claims and predictions and everything that it adds to the confusion rather than the clarification in some cases.
Well, speaking of the internet and claims, I saw somewhere one of the YouTubes that pop up was that the rapture was supposed to happen yesterday. Did we miss it?
Uh-oh. We missed it.
We missed it.
It was so secret and quiet
Yes,
that we missed it.
we missed it. Yeah,
I didn't see any airplanes crash. So no pilots must have went.
yeah.
I didn't see any trains or buses crashing, so none of them must have been able to go.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody emailed me or called me and said that their family member is missing.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that's pretty secret and quiet, isn't it?
That's very secret. Yes.
I didn't hear any trumpets blowing, any shout.
No. Yeah, that's odd, isn't it?
Well, I wonder which. Maybe it's some small group over in China got taken, or what do you think? I don't know.
I hardly doubt China. Actually, I take that back.
It was actually predicted to be yesterday for sure.
That's
predicted ahead of time because the one who predicted it expected themselves to be part of it.
Well, of course, yes, yeah. I saw YouTube. Someone had, might have been on Facebook. It was pointing to something that the rapture was supposed to happen yesterday. I still can't believe that people are setting dates.
I thought the heart, the essence of pre-tribulation rapture was imminence, that you will not know the day or the hour ahead of time. Mm-hmm. And it could happen without any advance notice of any type. So why would a person be predicting it and yet still believe in imminence?
Yeah. Because if he's
Those
predicting
two don't
it,
seem to go together, do they?
They don't. If he's predicting it a week out or a month out or whatever, there goes your imminence.
That eliminates imminence, huh?
It does.
It's saying, Lord, you can't come back until at least a week from now.
Yes.
Right. So it's not imminent. It cannot be any moment. As I like to say to people who find out, that my belief on the resurrection rapture, they say, "Don't you believe the coming of the Lord is imminent?" And I say, "Definitely." Mm-hmm. But I mean imminent with an E, not with an I.
Yes, right. Yes. Yes. Yeah. The preeminent one.
The preeminent one, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Any more on the red heifer before we jump back into Deuteronomy?
I can't think of anything offhand, but if I ever do develop it into a lesson, it might be more fitting as a lesson perhaps than an actual message. But
speaking of lessons, let me give you a few 3-point outline verses for sermons or lessons.
All right.
As you know, and I've brought up several times, these recurring patterns in the Bible. Mm-hmm. And I notice that one of the recurring patterns is that there's a lot of verses that have a 3-point outline to them clearly stated. In other words, there's 3 phrases maybe speaking about an overall subject, and then the writer breaks it down into 3 parts that really makes for a good outline. And I noticed a couple of them here in Deuteronomy chapter 10. One is in verse 8. At that time, the Lord separated the tribe of Levi. For what purpose? Well, at least 3. Number 1, to bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord. Number 2, to stand before the Lord to minister to him. Number 3, and to bless his name to this day. So those 3 are enough different from each other. They're similar, but they're different.
Yeah.
And so like each point expands on the other and builds an entire picture. And I love verses like that. First of all, it makes it easy for you to outline. But second of all, it allows the listeners, the congregation, to, as I said this last Sunday at Liberty, this is the kind of sermon that you are preaching along with me, that you're thinking along with me, that you're
Yes.
developing the sermon outline and thoughts at the same time I am. And
Mhm.
verses like this allow the congregation to be
Mhm.
drawn in
Mhm.
to where they're thinking how they would develop those three thoughts. And the verse comes alive, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
And it really just helps simplify. So, you know, someone asked you, what was the job of the Levites? Well, you turn to Deuteronomy chapter 10,
Hmm. Hmm.
verse 8. And
There it
there's at
is.
least three things there spelled out.
Yeah.
You know, real simple to understand.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as I say, they kind of build on each other, uh, or expand on each other. So I like that. There's another one in verse 12. And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you? So I like those kind of sermons where
Hmm.
the sermon title is a question.
Hmm. I actually did that one.
Yeah. Oh, you did this one?
Yeah.
And so there's 3 points, isn't there?
Hmm. Hmm.
Number 1, to fear the Lord your God. Number 2, to walk in all his ways. Number 3, and to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul. So what does he require? 3 things: to fear him, to walk in his ways, to love him. And those 3 things are what uh, amounts to
Hmm.
serving the Lord with all your heart.
Yeah. That constitutes that. I called
Yeah.
it. The base. God's basic requirements is what I named the
Yeah.
sermon. Yeah.
So, I mean, those kind of sermons preach well
They do. Yeah.
because your sermon outline is just one verse,
Hmm.
and the 3 points are easy to understand.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the person is just carried along with you,
Hmm.
which is really what you want in most sermons.
Yes. Yeah.
But some
Yeah.
texts, the way we develop some texts is a little more complicated or so forth. And so there's this pattern, what I call triplets, the triplet pattern, uh, quite a bit in the Old Testament. And I think that's why you'll find it a lot in Paul's writings.
Mm-hmm.
Paul was very uh, astute at kind of repeating the same thing like 3 times with different phrasing, but he's really kind of saying the same thing multiple times to reinforce
Right.
what he's trying to get across.
Yes.
And so Paul did that. But where I really noticed it one time was in the first chapter of Revelation. And I'll just maybe give a few of these. John really grabbed hold of that triplet idea. I think I wrote a paper one time, probably sent it out, called Triplets in Revelation 1 or something like that. I didn't look it up ahead of time, but it's probably somewhere stored in a file.
Yeah.
So like Revelation 1 and 2, number 1, John bore witness to the word of God. Number 2, and to the testimony of Jesus Christ. Number 3, and to all things that he saw. And then again in verse 3, blessed is he who, 1, reads. Number 2, those who hear the words of this prophecy. And number 3, and keeps those things that are written in it, for the time is near. And that's a real good one because it builds on each other.
Mm-hmm.
It expands each thought.
Mm-hmm.
So you read it, and that's good. But if you read it and hear it, that's even better. And of course, if you read it and hear it and keep it, that's what God really wants.
Yeah, yeah, that's the best.
Yeah, that's the best. So that's just and you could easily develop an entire sermon on those
Mm-hmm.
3 points.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Benefits of reading the Bible.
Yeah, yeah.
Benefits of being in a place where it is taught publicly so you can hear it.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, the main benefit of putting those 2 things together and practicing it, mm-hmm. and grafting it into your life, mm-hmm. letting it be part of your practice. Why? Because the time is near. Mm-hmm. So that's and John just keeps doing this all the way through this chapter, like in verse 5. And from Jesus Christ, number 1, the faithful witness. Mm-hmm. Number 2, the firstborn from the dead. Number 3, and the ruler over the kings of the earth. So those 3 preach real easily. You could almost make an entire sermon out of each one of those 3 points.
Yes.
Those are pretty large doctrines about Christ.
You could even make a series out of it.
Yeah, you could. So, I mean, I don't want to keep going, but there's more in Revelation chapter 1. And, you know, it kind of goes back to what I've said many times. These New Testament writers were very familiar with the Bible of their day, the Old Testament prophets and Moses especially.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would also pick up on that style of writing. And so if they would read Moses and Isaiah and so forth and become very familiar with their writings, they'd also notice that they would use this triplet idea to flesh out or to develop the major thought with 3 different points. And often those 3 points would build on each other to give a complete picture.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, and it's a form of repetition, but it's not strictly repetition. It's kind of repeating, but enlarging at the same time. It's just a good way of developing a main subject, is to break it down like that.
Yeah. And it also satisfies those who enjoy expository. Like you said, you're focusing on one passage.
You're just camping out. You know, I do that quite a bit. I'll start a sermon by saying we're going to camp out. You know, this passage today. So put down your stakes. Right here.
Yeah.
And try to, as I like to use a particular phrase, let's wring out of this passage everything we think we can today.
Yeah.
And I enjoy that quite a bit. Did you have any, because I'd asked you ahead of time, that we're just kind of picking out some selected verses through, like chapter 10 through 15 or something, whatever we get to today.
Yeah.
Do you have any in chapter 10?
Well, what jumped out at me was the second giving of the law, you know, the second set of commandments. 10, let's see. First, he broke the first.
The first
set, yeah.
4 verses or whatever.
And had you thought of, well, of course, he had to give a second set because the first ones were broken.
Yeah, he said in verse 2, he's talking to Moses, and I will write on the tablets the words which were on the first tablet, which you broke.
Yeah.
It's like a double meaning, huh?
Yeah.
He broke them literally to show them they had already broken the law that he had not even brought down to read to them yet.
Yes.
He had already broken it.
Right.
And they're called in verse 4. The New King James says the 10 Commandments, and there's a center column footnote that says literally 10 words. That's why we call the 10 Commandments the Decalogue, 10 words, because they may not have been exactly, but some think they were exactly simply a single word with the negative in front of it. You know, like in Greek, it's the letter alpha. But so, in other words, one of the commandments would simply be the word idols with the negative in front of it, meaning no idols.
No idols.
Or no stealing. No, whatever commandment you want to name, it's just kind of could be summarized in one word with a negative in Hebrew in front of it. And so Decalogue, 10 word, we read the 10 Commandments in Exodus and Deuteronomy, and we kind of think that's how it was written on the tablets, but it may have been written in a more succinct style actually on those tablets.
And of course, this was all before their captivity in Babylon. So the letters the style of letter or the symbols would not have been what we consider the Hebrew style today. They didn't develop that till their time in Babylon. So it would have been more of the pictograph.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah. Verse 16 is, therefore circumcise the foreskin of your heart, be stiff-necked no longer. It's just another way of saying the first great commandment, which is, stated again in verse 12, to love him, love your God, Lord your God, with all your heart, with all your soul, which is the great Shema of Deuteronomy 6, first great commandment. And just another way of saying it is circumcision of heart. And that particular phrase is used much more rarely than most people think. It captures such an important truth, but that exact statement is only used a few times in Deuteronomy and once in Jeremiah. In other places, it might call them stiff-necked or those kind of things, which is kind of referencing the same thing. Jeremiah 4:4, it's used. But just another way of saying, love the Lord with all your heart, soul, and mind. And of course, we know that Stephen, in that great sermon in Acts 7, basically is referring to this when he said, you're uncircumcised in heart and ears.
Yes. Yeah.
So the negative is used when they're not doing this. The negative is used a few times in the Bible also, but relatively few times with this exact wording. And yet the truth of it is all the way through the Bible. So, it's not as if it's unimportant because it's said this way so rarely. It's at the heart of the whole Bible.
I mentioned in this last Sunday's Sunday school class, Brother Dan Cardona is the teacher, so he's got 3 months. So he's been bringing through verses that focus on body relationship, church members relationship, interrelationship. And I mentioned that sometimes it's a blessing to grow up in church. That's a blessing. I mean, to have that type of atmosphere to grow up under and all that. But there can be a negative. And this is what we see with the people that Moses is dealing with. And then, of course, fast forward the same people that Stephen was dealing with and Jesus, people of first century, is you can develop this thin coating, hardness, where you're just used to the phrases, we call it Christian speak. You've heard of that term, Christian speak. Okay. So we pick up all the phrases and the things that, we are accustomed to hearing. But inside that outer shell isn't quite developed. So the character isn't there, but on the outside, you've got all the resemblance of a Christian. You talk like a Christian, you walk like a Christian, but on the inside, there's just not that character development. In fact, it may have been arrested, at some point in your life where you just kind of got into a rhythm, into a flow of, a behavior basically to please. But it wasn't sincere. And so we see this all throughout the scriptures of sincerity, love sincerely, from the inside out. And so I think when we see Moses here dealing with these people, you're stiff-necked, circumcise your heart. It was the same thing. They were the covenant people of God. Well, what was wrong with the picture? Well, they were the covenant people in position. They were positioned as such. But now the internal part of it on the individual basis wasn't quite there. And that's what needed to be developed.
That's a subject I've paid quite a bit of interest. I've had quite a bit of interest in that throughout my life because I grew up in church. And I've noticed overall, I consider it a benefit.
Yes, absolutely.
Of course, it helped that I had godly parents.
Mhm.
You know, if you don't have godly parents to back up what you're learning in church,
Mhm.
then you have a pretty high chance of becoming self-righteous,
Mhm.
learning how to act like a Christian.
Yeah.
Sometimes even before you're a Christian,
Yes.
like we
Right.
did growing up in church.
Uh-huh.
We had this 6-point Sunday school system. You know, we had the envelopes, and at the bottom it was broken down into 6 different parts. So, like if you gave an offering, you got 10%. If you showed up on time, you got 10%. If you invited someone, you got 20%. If you stayed for preaching, back then, as when I was a kid, the Sunday school and the preaching time was like almost 2 distinct services. And it was, I mean, looking back, is really an odd thing that a lot of old time missionary Baptists, they consider Sunday school mainly for the kids. And so after Sunday school, we'd often have as many as 25 extra people show up for the singing and preaching that did not come to Sunday school. And but so our goal as a class, going through each step of beginner class, you see junior class,
Primary,
class, senior class.
uh-huh.
So you'd move up classes every couple years in age,
Mhm.
and the classes almost, well, they did. I mean, it was actually promoted,
Mhm.
compete with each other
Mhm.
to see which classes could more often get 100% on their envelope as a class.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, my parents, even though they would give the offerings for the family, but because 10% to get to 100% on your envelope, you had to give an offering, and they didn't consider the offering they gave for the family is they didn't consider it the right thing for each of us as kids to mark that we gave an offering. So they'd give us a penny or a nickel or something,
Yes.
stick in the envelope so we could get 100%.
Yes.
And the superintendent would get up and the secretary would give a report. And superintendent would get up and he'd commend the classes that got 100% that morning. And, and we thought, and so I learned how to act like a Christian before I was one.
Yes. Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
is that bad? Well, it can be.
Mm-hmm.
I think overall it's good if somehow you can
survive it.
Well, if you reach a place where you realize,
yeah,
I need to personalize this, and put my personal faith in Christ as my Savior, and receive baptism from the church and officially join. And, we would hand out attendance pins. Superintendent get up and say, little Rick Howard has attended Sunday school for 3 months straight. Come up and get your 3-month pin.
Yes.
And it'd be a 6-month and then a year if you made a year. And then we'd always admire those. Some of them got up to 5 or 10, 15 years even, straight attendance every Sunday.
Wow.
And so they'd have these long list of pins hanging down, like a military medals hanging down. And it was, so I've brought that up through the years as sometimes I've brought up the negative aspects of that, where it can promote Phariseeism, that I'm a better person because I get 100% on my envelope more often than you do.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a longer set of pins hanging down, perfect attendance. But a few people through the years that also grew up in church, they would point out, well, but is it wrong to teach people these good practices, even if they're not a church member? Is it wrong? So I've kind of revised. I'm not as critical as I once was. We don't use the 6-point system. That all came from the Southern Baptist Convention.
Oh, yeah.
So, we kind of adopted it ourselves. But people that grow up in church, it's a matter of just your own heart. Like,
It is.
if you're circumcised of heart or not, because, but I've seen, there's a real danger of them going one of two directions.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing them deciding that this is hypocritical and Phariseeism. You're trying to force me to act like a Christian even before I'm saved and a member.
Mm-hmm.
And then they maybe do get saved and become a member, but then they drop out because they just think, well, you're just teaching all outward things instead of inward things. So then they rebel against it and quit. Or they stay in church their whole life. They truly do become a Pharisee, but they see all these outward things as the evidence of being a true Christian. And you want to avoid both extremes.
Yes, you do. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's not easy.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with, teaching these good practices to the kids growing up in church, even though they haven't made a profession or been baptized yet.
I agree with you. I think it has more pluses than negatives. I really do, because
but there are dangers in it.
You
have to really emphasize the inward a lot.
Yes.
So that they don't grow up thinking that the outward is mainly what matters.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But it does provide that foundation in which you grow up. The influence is totally greater there than if it wasn't. But there
what's the alternative? Don't teach them good things.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So,
yeah. And so I see that all throughout Scripture, the message is the same because of our fallen nature. It needs to be of the heart. We've preached this many times. And in fact, this last Sunday, I preached it again, that the doorknob is on the inside of the heart, not the outside. So when the Lord comes knocking, then the conviction is there. That he's not going to open up the door. There's no doorknob on his side. You've got to open up the door yourself.
Another thing I noticed in chapter 11 that is often overlooked, the importance of it, is in verse 10, starting verse 10. For the land which you go to possess is not like the land of Egypt from which you have come, where you sowed your seed and watered it by foot as a vegetable garden. But the land which you cross over to possess is a land of hills and valleys, which drinks water from the rain of heaven. And this is mainly what I'm thinking of, a land for which the Lord cares. So I have written in my old wide margin Bible, that's Beulah land. That's kind of the root of the idea of Isaiah 62:4, Beulah land, a land that I care for. And the importance that I think is not given enough to that part of the Abrahamic covenant of the land, which is so key to the whole thing.
Yeah.
Which is why, here we are 4,000 years later from Genesis 12. That land is still being fought over.
Yeah.
Because God chose that land for himself.
Yeah.
It's his land.
Yes. Yeah.
And Israel became the stewards of it, inheritors of it. And it will be given to the Lord's people at his return as part of their inheritance. But because it's part of what we call God's election, it's part of his choice. That's why the enemy fights for it, wants to possess it. I'm thinking of a particular verse in Ezekiel, I believe, 36. Let me see if that's it real quick. Yes. So I think one thing that's going to happen during the tribulation, one of the things that will be driving the Antichrist to fight against Israel is because Satan has always wanted that which God has chosen for his son and for his people. And part of that is the land. Where will the Antichrist be when he commits the abomination of desolation? He'll be in Jerusalem. That means he has taken it, captured it, and driven them out. And Ezekiel 36 and 2 says, "Thus says the Lord God, because the enemy has said of you, aha, the ancient heights have become our possession."
Yeah.
That's what they've always wanted.
Uh-huh.
And he will get it for a limited time.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the purpose of the return of Christ is to drive him out of Christ's land, God's
Mm-hmm.
land,
Yes.
and to cleanse it. And that gets back to the red heifer
Mm-hmm.
again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It will be purified.
Yeah.
And part of what makes the land unclean is death, dead bodies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so it talks about, where's that? Ezekiel 38, 9, 7 months to bury the dead.
Yes. Yeah.
So there's something about that. The reason that's included, that's part of the purification process
Mm-hmm.
that Christ will do right after he returns, because the land must be purified as well as a people must be purified.
Mm-hmm.
And so for 7 months, they're going to be burying the dead, partly for the purpose of purifying the land.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this whole part, I think, has overlooked a lot of the importance of the land as part of the Abrahamic promise, and why that small piece of land, that little tiny piece of land, has the enemies, whether it be the great empire, Gentile empires, or whether it then became the rival Abrahamic religion of Islam. They claim it anyway. They claim connection to Abraham. Has also fought over that land and captured it and ruled over it for hundreds of years. And why the very day that the West especially recognized Israel as a nation in May of 1948, that same day that became official, the surrounding nations declared war. Why did they do it on the same day? Because they hate God's election of a people and a land.
Yes. Yeah.
And so we can go on and on about that, but I just found it interesting, this little statement: a land which the Lord cares for. The eyes of the Lord your God are always on it. Yeah.
Well, it's a holy land. And just as the utensils of the tabernacle and all the inorganic materials were cleansed in order for them to be used and acceptable. So not only the people, but the blood was also sprinkled on the artifacts. And so you're right. When Jesus comes back, he's going to have to cleanse the land, not just the people, but the land, because that's the land in which they will walk and serve and worship God. So it too has to be returned to holiness.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
He sanctifies the land.
He's got to sanctify the land. Yeah. Yeah.
So there's going to be a great earthquake. And it probably is part of the purification, is to change the very geography of the land itself, as part of the cleansing process.
Yeah.
And the elevated plane that he will rule from, that holy hill of Mount Zion will be elevated and cleansed, and so that, as I think we may have said last week, or I forget where I say things, my end time sessions or whatever, but that little piece of land, we might say the whole area of inheritance, but especially that holy hill of Zion, is the most valuable piece of real estate on the entire earth. It's not Manhattan.
Right.
It's not that little island of Manhattan. It is Mount Zion, literally.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of ways of looking at prophecy of, all meal or post meal or pre meal. but some of the systems of looking at prophecy try to spiritualize all this away,
right.
make it heaven or something that it's
Mm-hmm.
not. It's not literally a piece of land on the earth that
Mm-hmm.
is going to be the center focus of prophecy, and in the millennial, it's heaven or some other spiritual kind of application.
Mm-hmm. And I think once people start to formulate the picture of God's intended purpose as being tied to the earth, things can become, they will become way more clear as to how he's been unfolding this plan in the scriptures, by electing a people for the land and then dealing with those people for good or bad with his plan in mind. And so he wants to develop a holy people. And when they're not being very holy, he has to stop and take matters into consideration in order to shape them up to be holy. But it'll always be the minority within any covenant community. It'll always be the minority. And so that's why the emphasis on circumcising the heart, so that you'll be in that minority.
Yeah, I asked myself a question the other day. I'd never quite thought of this question. Let me see if I can word it properly. Because we believe, the Bible clearly teaches the idea of an elect remnant,
Mm-hmm.
and so is the minority. I mean, the gate is narrow and the way is narrow,
Mm-hmm.
and he says, and few there be that find it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's just the fact of the matter.
Yeah, that's just a fact. Yeah.
But have the few in history, because we'd like to think we're part of the few today.
Mm-hmm.
Did the few in history, how did they see themselves? I mean, does the elect remnant see themselves as the elect remnant? And do they look at the majority, even in the Christian religious world, and compare themselves to it? I'm thinking, of course, of the size of most of our churches, number of people who attend, and the number of people who then are also faithful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In our churches. How do we see ourselves really there? I mean, we want to be circumcised in heart. We want to be part of the elect remnant. But I guess I asked the question, did the elect remnant in history really recognize they were the elect remnant? And did they look at others, like, say, within Judaism, within Jewish religion? Did Zacharias and Elizabeth and Mary and Joseph, Anna and Simeon, and then the first disciples called to be apostles, and yet they were part of a larger religious system that, at least outwardly, many appeared to be righteous. So how did they see themselves compared to those who were part of a much larger percentage within their own religious system? Did they ever ask questions? Why is the path we're trying to follow attracting so much fewer than the path they're trying to follow in the same, you might say, larger religious circle of the same kind?
Mm-hmm.
So today would say Christianity. So they're using the same Bible, speak about the same Jesus. They practice many of the same things, and yet they're growing and prospering and big buildings and lots of people. And here we are, kind of a smaller part of that big circle, that have enough differences that we're attracting far fewer. And I'm just trying to think about how the elect remnant may have thought of themselves within the larger circle of Christianity or the Jewish religion through history.
I would like to think that you mentioned Simeon and Anna and and the other faithful of that first century, that there must have been something that they noticed that was not appealing in the Pharisaical systems for them to not want to just blend into that system, because they clearly weren't blended in. They clearly had a holiness within that constituted them being singled out, and they were right there in the temple dedicating Jesus. So it must have been the Spirit witnessing to their spirit that they were on the right path.
Yeah, but many other people of the Jewish religion would come into the temple just like them.
Yeah.
Offering the same sacrifices, saying the same kind of prayers.
Yeah.
So it's, I guess one thing we need to warn our people about is, yes, the elect remnant will always be a small percentage of the larger group of that same so-called religious practice, Christianity or whatever. So it will always be relatively small, but just because you're small doesn't mean you're part of the elect remnant.
Right.
So we can't look at the size of our churches and say, well, that in itself is evidence we are in the truth, part of the elect remnant.
Yeah.
Because there's plenty of very small groups who hold entirely different practices and doctrines than we do. And so you can't say just
because
thing alone is proof.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you might be small because you're not spiritual.
Right. Yeah.
You're away from God. That may be the reason you're small.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
but don't get us wrong. We're trying to grow. we want to grow.
And we don't want to be as small as we are.
Right. Yeah.
but even if we do grow in our way of looking at things, maybe grow quite a bit, it's still going to be a small percentage of what is called the Christian religion. Yeah.
Yeah. And
so
then
we have plenty of room to grow and still be an elect remnant.
And we just don't want our people to be discouraged and start looking around and saying, well, look at those groups, and be, drawn in that direction. But just to understand that it is a fact, like you said, the elect will always be smaller than the whole. They'll be the smallest piece of pie.
There is an appeal, there is an appeal. And I don't think we've given enough thought and development of explanations of some of this. When I was growing up, it's much easier to distinguish what we call landmark Baptists from the other Christian religions, because the other Christian religions were primarily Protestant denominations, Presbyterian or Lutheran or, whatever, Pentecostals, Catholics or whatever. So they had their own camp of beliefs and practices and national headquarters and, all that. And there was enough major differences that it was easier to distinguish ourselves. And in my lifetime, I don't think enough consideration has been given to the rise of non-denominational, independent, they don't call themselves Baptists, but quite conservative in politics and in their view of inspiration. They have a high view of inspiration.
Yeah.
Godly living, letting the Bible be your rule of belief and practice. And so that it makes it much more difficult for the members in our pews to see the differences, because the differences are much less than the old denominations. And so, I've heard many people from landmark Baptist churches, attend a special meeting or, now available online, watch all their YouTubes and so forth.
Yeah.
And then, tell their pastor or tell me, I could agree with everything I heard. They're
Mhm.
very, very close to us in belief
Mhm.
and practice. I don't know that I could even point out what
Mhm.
their differences are.
Mhm.
They practice baptism by immersion, baptism after profession of faith. Right. So they start going right down the line.
Yeah.
They're real conservative in their lifestyle and their politics. And the average member in a Landmark Baptist pew would be hard pressed to be able to explain why we don't count them as a sister church.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. So,
Where my mind goes immediately, just as I, hearing you describe that, uh, is where do they stand on the universal church?
mhm.
Because where they the nature of the church will then guide their decisions in what baptisms and such that they accept. And so it
But
gets
even that has become so clouded because the more conservative, what we would call universalists, the more conservative really stress this dual idea that
Mhm.
the church is universal. All the saved are immersed into the body of Christ at salvation,
Mhm.
but it must be expressed by a local version of the church.
Mhm.
So it's necessary also for you to be part of a local church.
Mhm.
So this dual idea
Yeah.
allows them to be universalist and local church kind of at the same time. And that throws a lot of our
Mhm.
people off because
Mhm.
they'll hear a local church message
Yes.
when beneath that it's really a universalist
Yes.
belief.
Yeah. And the pastor has to believe in a local church because that's where he gets his paycheck. So he can't dismiss it altogether, you know.
Well, I mean, the thing is, if they're truly conservative in their view of the Bible, they're forced to a local church
Mhm.
position
Only. Yeah.
because that's what ecclesia. I mean, that's what the New Testament presents.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
they also hold to the universal idea because
Mhm.
they, teach that you're brought into it at salvation. So, all of this gets clouded, doesn't it? And so people then start thinking, well, it's not really then doctrine or practice because they're so close to us.
Mhm.
So it's more about maybe other things. Maybe their worship music is better,
Mhm.
more skilled musicians and singers.
Mhm.
Maybe they have more um, offerings through the week of different
Programs and
programs um, for recovery of
Mhm.
addictions, for marriage counseling, for uh, financial advice from the Bible. They offer more ministries, they call it,
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
and they actually have paid staff who are experts in those fields, maybe have degrees from
Mhm.
seminaries and colleges in those fields. And so a lot of the information is quite good and
Mhm.
conservative and Bible based.
Mhm. Yes. Yes.
So they have a lot more to offer than just, a Sunday morning sermon or whatever they think we might offer.
Mhm.
And half the church singing off tune on
Mhm.
Sunday, during the
Mhm.
congregation singing. And
Mhm.
maybe the
Mhm.
song leader doesn't know how to read notes and timing properly. So, there's a little bit of unprofessional approach to it all. The pastor doesn't have some kind of advanced degree.
Mhm.
So they start seeing all the shortcomings, maybe of
Yes.
their own church.
Yeah.
And in their mind, the message they hear at this other larger group is close enough to what they hear out of their own pulpit, but there's a lot more other things to be offered.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of
Well,
like a person who's just been won over to Mormonism. Guys come at his door and they talk into it. So if he sets foot in the Mormon, temple for the first time, he has no clue as to the underbelly of that system. You have to climb up the ranks before you see what really is behind the curtain.
yeah.
Okay. And so you would have to all the stuff is surface. What you're describing is all very, very surface. But it kind of reminds me of that parable in the New Testament that the field that started out with all wheat was suddenly sown with tares that looked just like the wheat.
Mm-hmm.
And so now there's confusion. So you have to wait till they grow up together in order for them to then be successfully separated. But yeah, there's a lot of tares in there that look like wheat. And so it is confusing. And so that's why I always go back to that universal church. If they just are accepting baptisms from who knows who, that's, to me, that's a clear sign that they would need to be baptized again. And that's the spirit of anabaptism.
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole spirit behind. We're not trying to be ecumenical. We're trying to remain as separate as possible. So, but I hear what you're saying, especially the younger group. If
I tried to diagram it one time and I sent it out. You probably have it tucked away in some deep dark folder named Rick Howard. One of the computers that you're not using anymore.
Yes.
But I drew across the top of like a landscape page, so sideways,
mm-hmm.
The pure stream of Christ,
mm-hmm.
Matthew 16:18, the pure stream.
Mm-hmm.
And shortly after this start of it, representing a few hundred years, a side stream began to develop that became the Roman Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it kept getting further and further away. So I had that stream kind of going down toward the bottom of the page.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then after several hundred years, like the Reformation, a stream off of the Roman Church developed called the Protestant Reformation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, at that point, there was so much difference between this pure stream and that Protestant stream that broke off from the Catholic Church. The differences were still so great that it's like entirely different.
Mm-hmm.
But then I show, before it goes off to the edge of the page, and it's way down from the top pure stream, another stream breaks off in our day, these independent, conservative, Bible-believing churches,
mm-hmm.
so-called churches, that works its way back toward closer to the pure stream and then kind of starts running alongside of it.
Yeah.
So it's not the pure stream, but it's running alongside of it. It looks really close to it.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
That's where we are today. That's why it's so difficult.
Yeah.
Is they believe maybe in local church government
mm-hmm.
instead of a national headquarters.
Mm-hmm.
They believe in being sovereign, autonomous,
yes,
self-governing.
Yes.
They do practice immersion for baptism. They do require a testimony. They do expect godly living. They do, just on and on and on. They do practice the proper elements for the Lord's Supper.
Well, let me share with our viewers that
you found it.
Yes.
Well, my drawing is terrible. Oh, there it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
See, it's messy and all that, but you can get the idea. So that pure stream stays straight. Mm-hmm. The Roman Church branches off of it early, and it keeps getting further and further away as they became more corrupt. That's the polluted stream, I call it.
Yes. Yes.
And then the Protestants break off from that. So at that part where the Protestant churches break off from the polluted stream, mm-hmm. there's still so much difference from the pure stream at the top.
Mm-hmm.
And that local independent stream breaks off and works its way back toward the pure stream.
Mm-hmm.
So in our day, it's real close looking.
Yes.
And so many people can't see the difference.
Mm-hmm.
That's
mm-hmm.
what we're really fighting against today.
Absolutely. And just as God told the Hebrew families to teach your children these principles from the cradle on up, so that they are infused into their hearts.
Let's just read that, Mike. Read it for us. And that's where I've got my Bible open to it right now in Deuteronomy 11, starting in verse 18
mm-hmm.
through 22. Why don't you just read those for us?
Okay. I'll read it out of the New King James.
Okay.
Deuteronomy 11:18. Therefore, you shall lay up these words of mine in your heart and in your soul, and bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall teach them to your children, speaking of them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way, when you lie down and when you rise up. And you shall write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates, that your days and the days of your children may be multiplied in the land which the Lord swore to your fathers to give them, like the days of the heavens above the earth. For if you carefully keep all these commandments which I command you to do, to love the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, and to hold fast to him, then the Lord will drive out all these nations from before you, and you will be you will dispossess greater and mightier nations than yourselves.
So these nations kind of represent other religions in our day.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So the importance of the family in this case.
Yes.
He's not even putting this on the priest and the prophets,
right,
and the king. It said back in verse 16, take heed to yourselves lest your heart be deceived.
Mm-hmm.
How important it is in verse 16 to take heed to yourself.
Yes. How that when they asked him what the signs would be for his return, I mentioned that he led off with that, be not deceived. That's how he began to answer their question, is to be on guard against deception.
Yes.
He listed a bunch of other things, but he led with that one.
I'm talking about a lot of things, but I'm really talking about beware of deception.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
So, Moses is warning them about it. And one of the things that we can be deceived about, and this is what got them into so much trouble in the history, maybe we'll close with this, a prescribed place of worship.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of the place.
Mm-hmm.
So, they could say the right things, offer the right sacrifices and all that, but if it was not done in the right place, it was rejected.
Yes.
Yeah. So he had an into the New Testament with the same terminology, the house of God, the temple of God.
Yes.
The place of his dwelling.
Well, you and I have talked about this in other sessions, the whole importance of chain of custody.
Chain of custody.
Chain of custody.
But you shall seek the place where the Lord your God chooses. So that's why we stress so strongly and often the idea of election is about, it's more of a corporate idea than a personal idea. And so they could have a note here, verse 13. Yeah. Take heed to yourself that you do not offer your burnt offerings in every place that you see. So it'd be this correct offering, but the wrong place.
Yeah.
But in the place, proper sacrifices in an improper place was rejected.
Yeah.
That's what we're really getting at today. Is it looks like these other people in many cases are offering the correct sacrifices.
Yeah.
But is it the proper place?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the principle is just the opposite here. You say, well, that's for Israel. Let's talk about the temple. It's talking about Jerusalem. It's not for Christians today. Oh, the principle is there carried over into the New Testament.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Well, that was the commission.
Chapter, how often the word there, and I have it circled in my old study Bible. There and where. Be careful. Make sure you do it there, not somewhere else. Otherwise, if you decide you shall not at all do as we are doing here today, every man doing what is right in his own eyes. And that's what is happening today, is people are saying, well, I'm doing the right things, but I'm just choosing to do it in a different place.
Yeah.
This whole chapter then brought out in the New Testament regarding the New Testament ecclesia. And, we love Ephesians 3:21, and to him be glory in the church.
Yes.
Well, doesn't he get glory elsewhere? Well, he gets glory from all of his creation. Tongue can confess that Jesus is the Lord, and God's going to get glory from that, even though he's going to, reject them. Because they rejected him, but they're going to confess it, and he's going to get glory from it.
Yeah.
So, God gets glory from many different primary place to receive it, the best place,
Mm-hmm.
as Ephesians 1 concludes by saying, the church is the fullness of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where he has chosen that the fullness of his glory
Mm-hmm.
should dwell.
Yes.
And for us to come along and do what is,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that's what we get a lot, huh?
Yeah.
Is we're both doing the same things.
Well, when Israel split into two kingdoms, one of the first things the northern kingdom did was set up a false, temple, and they broke away from the original. So they broke off the chain of custody, and they started
and he made priests of every class.
Yes, he did.
So he rejected the election of God for who should be the priests,
mm-hmm.
and he rejected the place where they were to serve. And
mm-hmm.
of course, Jeroboam said, again,
mm-hmm. Yes.
and then they won't want me king.
Yes.
So he did it for personal greed and power.
Yeah.
And so, but he, like as anyone who wants power does, they use deception.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't tell the real reason of Jerusalem. So let's
mm-hmm.
set up a couple of places closer,
mm-hmm.
make it easier,
mm-hmm.
and make it according to maybe our personality or our way of doing it that fits us better than what they're through chapter
12,
like 10, 11, and 12. We got through kind of 3 chapters. We didn't cover them in great detail, but we drew out some
mm-hmm.
big things from those 3 chapters. End of Deuteronomy, we might be able to kind of skim through even quicker than we did today. I do want to camp out in chapter 31 and 32 eventually. But
well, I hope our viewers got something out of these 3 chapters. You're right. We didn't travel down the map much, but I hope we gave them something to sink their teeth in.
So maybe we'll be through Deuteronomy by the time we get to 100. Because a lot of between here and the end of the book is repetition of the laws of Exodus. But chapter 32 is very prophetic. I call it the fountainhead of prophecy.
Mm.
That, along with Genesis 3:15, but
mm-hmm.
chapter 32 develops a whole lot of prophetic themes. So we'll camp out there.
I can't believe
we feed off each other pretty well, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I can't believe we're only 6 sessions away from reaching 100. Did you ever think we would?
I had no clue.
It's been exciting. I've really enjoyed it. I hope we just, keep on. I know my son Andrew would like to come on board and just make a threesome out of it one of these times. And I know
he would.
Braden would like to.
I know Braden hopes would love it.
I absolutely would love it as well. So I'll keep at him. I know he's mentioned it to me, but I'll keep reminding him.
Yeah, we'll even try to adjust the time we record these and everything for
mm-hmm.
people. It doesn't have to be the set time we have every week.
Exactly.
Anyway, thanks everyone. We'll stop the recording and maybe stay on a few minutes afterwards.
All right. Thank you everyone for viewing.
You can find the right button this time.
Yeah. See.